The first thing Leo noticed was the silence. It was a specific kind of quiet, the kind that only exists in a hospital waiting room at 3 in the morning. It wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, thick with the breath being held by a dozen different people, each lost in their own private world of fear. The air hummed with the low industrial purr of a vending machine down the hall, and beneath that, the faint antiseptic smell that tried and failed to cover the scent of sweat and stale coffee and pure undiluted worry. Leo was sitting in a hard plastic chair that was bolted to the floor, his hands dangling between his knees, staring at a scuff mark on the linoleum tile. He'd been tracing its shape with his eyes for what felt like hours, a continent of despair, his own personal map of misery. His father was upstairs. The words didn't feel real. They felt like something he'd read on a page, something that was happening to another person in another life. A massive, sudden heart attack. Out of nowhere. One minute his dad was complaining about the neighbors' loud music. The next, he was on the kitchen floor, his face the color of old dishwater. The doctors had used words like critical and touch and go, and the next 24 hours are crucial. Each word was a stone, and Leo was building a wall with them, brick by heavy brick, around himself, right there in that awful chair. He was alone. His mom was gone, years ago. No siblings. A few friends had texted, "Let me know if you need anything," the modern-day equivalent of a sympathetic pat on the shoulder from a distance. He hadn't answered. What was there to say? He was 34 years old and suddenly, terrifyingly, an orphan in the making. The weight of it was a physical pressure on his chest, making each breath a conscious, effortful act. He was so deep inside his own head, so consumed by the dizzying spiral of what-ifs and worst-case scenarios, that he almost didn't notice. The soft swish of the automatic doors opening down the hall. Almost. It was the sound that did it, or the lack of it. The doors hissed open, but there were no accompanying footsteps. No brisk, efficient clip of a nurse's shoes. No shuffling gait of a late-night visitor. There was just the open door. And then, a moment later, the quietest, most pathetic sound Leo had ever heard. It was less a meow and more a question mark made of air and pain. A tiny, ragged sigh that seemed to get lost in the vast, sterile space. Leo lifted his head, his neck stiff. His eyes, gritty from lack of sleep and unshed tears, scanned the bright, empty corridor. Nothing. He was about to drop his gaze back to his scuff-marked continent, to dismiss it as a trick of an exhausted mind, when he saw movement low to the ground near a large plastic ficus tree that was doing a poor job of looking alive. It was a cat. The sight was so bizarre, so utterly out of place, that it short-circuited his grief for a single, lucid second. A cat. In a hospital. It was painfully thin, a sliver of shadow detaching itself from the deeper shadows near the plant. Its fur was a mess of blacks and grays and dirty browns, a map of a hard life written in matted fur. It moved not with the grace people associate with cats, but with a stiff, careful delicacy, as if every step cost it something, as if its very bones ached. It paused, one front paw held slightly aloft, and looked directly at him. Its eyes were what undid him. They weren't the bright, curious eyes of a healthy animal. They were huge in its gaunt face, a pale, watery green, and they were full of a tired, ancient knowing. They held a world of hurt in them. They looked exactly how he felt. Hollowed out. At the end of everything. "Hey," Leo whispered, the words scraping out of his dry throat. It was an involuntary sound, a reflex. The cat didn't startle. It didn't run. It just continued to look at him, its sides moving in and out too, fast, a tiny, frantic bellows. It was then that Leo saw the state of it. One of its ears was nicked and torn, a classic battle scar of a life on the streets. Its ribs were visible even under the messy fur. And it was trembling. A fine, constant shiver that spoke of fever, or fear, or sheer exhaustion. "What are you doing here?" he thought. But the question felt too big, too layered. "How did you even get here? This isn't your place. This is my place of sorrow. This chair is mine. This fear is mine." The cat took another step, then another. Its movement a slow, painful pilgrimage across the cold floor. It wasn't heading towards him. Not exactly. It was heading towards the row of chairs opposite him. With an effort that seemed to cost it everything, it crouched low and then slid its fragile body underneath the seat, disappearing from view. All that was left was the faint sound of its labored breathing, a shaky, rhythmic counterpoint to the hum of the vending machine. Leo stared at the empty space under the chair. The absurdity of it should have been funny. It wasn't. It felt profound. It felt like a secret. In a building dedicated to healing, with its teams of surgeons and million-dollar machines and armies of dedicated staff, this one, broken creature had wandered in, seeking its own kind of sanctuary. It had chosen this room, this quiet, dark hour. It had chosen, it seemed, to be near him. He found himself holding his breath, listening for its sounds. That tiny, ragged breath was an anchor. It pulled him out of the terrifying, vast ocean of his own thoughts and into this moment. This specific, strange moment. There was a living thing, right there, suffering just as he was. Its suffering was quiet. It wasn't asking for anything. It was just present. He thought about getting up, maybe going to the front desk, telling the security guard, "Hey, there's a cat in here." But he didn't move. The thought of breaking the silence, of involving the outside world in this fragile, middle-of-the-night tableau, felt like a violation. This was between them. The man waiting to see if his father would live, and the sick cat who had walked into a hospital because it had nowhere else to go. He slowly leaned back in his chair, the plastic creaking under his weight. The sound from under the opposite chair hitched, then settled back into its shaky rhythm. He didn't look directly at the space under the chair anymore. He just knew it was there. A shared vulnerability, a silent acknowledgement that in this moment they were the same. Both scared, both hurting, both just waiting for the dawn to see what it would bring. And in that heavy, antiseptic silence, surrounded by the ghosts of other people's fears, Leo felt the first, faint stirring of something other than his own consuming dread. It was a tiny, fragile thread of connection, spun from the ragged breath of a stranger. It was the quiet knowledge that, for now, he wasn't completely alone. You're here, listening, and that means more than you know. If you feel safe in these stories, your one subscribe helps me keep this quiet little corner alive. Thank you for being part of this peaceful world. Leo didn't sleep. He couldn't. The plastic chair was a torture device, designed to keep you just uncomfortable enough to stay awake with your thoughts, which was its own special kind of hell. But now, his thoughts weren't just on the 5th floor, in a room he couldn't picture, with a man he couldn't imagine being still. They were also right here, under that chair across from him. The two anxieties began to braid together, a tight, twisting cord in his chest, the fear for his father, vast and cold, and this new, sharp, specific worry for the small creature breathing raggedly in the shadows. He'd texted his one close friend, Mark, just after 4 a.m., his thumbs clumsy on the bright screen in the dark. Room. Dad's still in surgery. Stable, I think. Waiting. A pause. Then the 3 dots appeared, even at this hour. Holy shit, Leo. I'm so sorry. Do you want me to come? Leo's eyes flickered to the space under the chair. He thought of the explaining he'd have to do, the looks from the nurses, the disruption. Not yet, he typed back. It's quiet here. I'll let you know. Okay, man. I'm here. Just say the word. The word. What was the word? The word was that there was a dying cat in the waiting room, and for some reason, its suffering felt like his own. And he couldn't leave it. He couldn't explain that. He couldn't even explain it to himself. It was just a fact, as solid and unmovable as the tile floor beneath his feet. He was staying. For his dad. For the cat. For the strange, fragile peace of not being the only one falling apart in this room. The sky outside the big windows began to soften from a deep, inky black to a murky, bruised gray. The rhythm of the hospital changed. The night shift, with its hushed, ghost-like efficiency, began to transition to the day shift. He heard more voices, the trundling of a cleaning cart, the distant beep of an elevator arriving and departing. With the light, His anxiety for the cat grew. Someone would see it. Someone would come with a broom, or a box, or call animal control. The spell would be broken. This tiny, shared secret would be over. He watched the space under the chair, barely blinking. The cat hadn't moved. The only evidence it was still there was the occasional heart-wrenching sound of a cough, a wet, shallow thing that made its whole small body convulse. Leo found himself wincing every time, his own chest tightening in sympathy. He had to do something. The helplessness was a taste like copper pennies in his mouth. When the first nurse walked briskly through the waiting room to adjust the thermostat, Leo acted on pure instinct. He slid his backpack from the floor onto the seat next to him, creating a barrier. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, blocking the view. He was a mountain, and under that chair was his valley, and he would not let anyone see into it. The nurse gave him a small, professional smile of acknowledgement, a smile that said, "I see your pain, and I'm sorry for it." And then she was gone. He let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. The cat was still. It had frozen. At the sound of the nurse's footsteps, becoming just another shadow, it was a survivor. It knew how to be invisible. That knowledge, written into its very bones, made Leo's heart ache more than any loud meow ever could. As the room brightened, he got his first real, sustained look at it. A sliver of morning light fell across the floor, illuminating the space. Under the chair just enough. The cat was curled into the tightest possible ball, its nose tucked into its tail. The fur wasn't just matted, it was caked in places with something dark that looked like grease or dirt. One of its back legs had a bald patch, the skin beneath looking raw and pink. But it was the eyes that got him. They were open, watching him. Not with fear, not anymore, but with a kind of exhausted, resigned awareness. It knew he was there. It knew he was watching. And it had, for reasons known only to itself, decided to tolerate it. The day wore on. A family arrived, loud and red-eyed, talking in hushed, frantic tones about their grandmother. Leo's heart hammered against his ribs. They took the chairs right next to the cat's hiding spot. One of the kids, a little boy, dropped a toy car, and it clattered and rolled, disappearing under the very chair. Leo held his breath, his muscles coiling. The boy started to crouch down to look for it. "Hey," Leo said, his voice rough from disuse. The family looked over at him, startled. "I think I see it. Over here." He pointed vaguely to the side of his own chair. He must have looked as ragged and desperate as he felt, because the boy's mother quickly pulled her son back, shooting Leo a wary look, and fished another toy out of her bag. The moment passed. The cat remained hidden. Leo felt a bizarre surge of triumph, mixed with a deep, thrumming exhaustion. He was its guardian now. Its silent sentinel. A doctor came out to speak to the family, and their world erupted into tears of relief. They gathered their things and left, their storm having passed. The waiting room was empty again. It was just him, and the hum of the lights, and the cat. His own update came around 10 a.m. A different doctor, younger, with a kind face. "Mr. Evans, your father is out of surgery. It went as well as we could have hoped. He's in the ICU now, sedated. The next 12 hours are still critical, but he's a fighter. He's stable." The words were a life raft. Leo felt the tight cord in his chest loosen. Just a single, vital notch. He could breathe again. He managed a choked, "Thank you," and the doctor left him alone with the staggering, dizzying relief. He put his face in his hands, not crying, just breathing, feeling the solid weight of the plastic chair beneath him for the first time. When he looked up, the cat was looking at him. It had uncurled slightly, its head now resting on its paws out in the open. Its strange, pale green eyes were fixed on him. It was as if it had felt the shift in him, the slight lessening of the atmospheric pressure in the room. It had been holding its breath with him, and now it was exhaling too. "He's okay," Leo whispered to it, to the empty room, to himself. "For now, he's okay." The cat blinked. A slow, deliberate closing and opening of its eyes. It wasn't a sleepy blink. It was purposeful. Leo, who had never had a pet, felt a strange, distant memory stir. Something he'd read online, once, or seen in a documentary. A slow blink. A sign of trust in the feline world. It was a gesture that said, "I feel safe enough with you right now to close my eyes." Was he imagining it? Probably. This thing was half dead, feverish. It was likely just blinking. But in the vacuum of his fear, the gesture felt immense. It felt like a gift. He found himself blinking back, slowly, carefully. The cat's ears twitched, just the tiniest flicker of movement. It was still watching him. His stomach growled, a loud, rude sound in the quiet. He'd forgotten about food entirely. He thought of the vending machine down the hall, its pathetic offerings of chips and candy bars. And then he thought of the cat. It was skin and bone. It had to be starving. And it was sick. It needed, what, water, food, something. The decision was made before he'd even fully formed the thought. He stood up, his joints protesting. The cat immediately tensed, its body coiling back into a defensive ball, its eyes wide, but it didn't scramble away. It just watched. Him, wary. "It's okay," he murmured, keeping his voice low and soft. "I'll be right back. I'm just going to get us something." He walked down the hall to the vending machine, his mind racing. What do cats eat? He stared at the options. Peanuts? No. Pretzels? No. There was a tuna salad sandwich, sealed in a triangular plastic container. It looked sad and processed, the bread too white, the tuna too beige. But it was protein. It was something. He bought the sandwich and a bottle of water. At the last second, he saw a small carton of milk. He bought that too, a cartoonish image of a happy cat popping into his head. He felt foolish, walking back to the waiting room with his odd assortment of goods, a secret agent on a bizarre mission. The cat was still there. It had retreated fully back under the chair, but it was watching his approach. Leo sat down slowly, making himself small, unthreatening. He opened the bottle of water first. He had no bowl. Nothing. He looked around, his eyes landing on the lid of the milk carton. He ripped it off. It was shallow, but it would work. He poured a little water into the makeshift bowl and, moving with a slowness that felt ceremonial, slid it across the floor until it was just at the edge of the shadow cast by the chair. He did the same with the tuna sandwich, breaking off a small chunk of the fish and placing it next to the water. The smell of tuna, overly salty and fishy, filled the air around him. He then retreated back to his chair, leaning back, trying to look as uninterested as possible. His heart was beating hard again, but this was a different kind of nerves. This was the anxiety of offering something and having it be rejected. For a long time, nothing happened. The cat remained hidden, its eyes two glowing points in the dark. Leo pretended to look at his phone, scrolling through meaningless notifications, giving it space, giving it time. He was about to give up, to assume he'd scared it off for good, when he saw a movement. A single, gray paw emerged from the darkness. Then a nose, twitching, sniffing the air. The head followed, cautiously. Its eyes darted from the food to Leo and back again. The calculation in its gaze was unmistakable. Hunger versus fear. Need versus a lifetime of learned caution. Hunger won. It crept forward, its body low to the ground, and began to lap at the water, its tiny tongue moving rapidly. The sound was incredibly loud in the silence. After a few seconds, it turned to the tuna, sniffing it delicately before taking a small, tentative bite. It ate like it did everything else, with a painful, careful delicacy, as if its jaw hurt. But it ate. It ate the entire piece he'd put down. Leo didn't move a muscle. He felt a surge of something so powerful it threatened to overwhelm him. It was pride. It was relief. It was a connection so simple and so profound it made his eyes sting. He had provided. It had accepted. A fundamental transaction of care had passed between them. He broke off another piece of tuna, and moving even, slower this time, placed it a few inches closer to himself. The cat watched his hand, its body tense, but it didn't flee. When his hand was back in his lap, it crept forward again and ate that piece too. They repeated this ritual, piece by piece, until the entire tuna portion of the sandwich was gone. The cat then drank more water, its whole body seeming to sigh with the relief of it. It sat back on its haunches then, just outside the shadow of the chair, and did the most extraordinary thing. It lifted a frail front paw and began, clumsily, to wash its face. It was a gesture of normalcy, of instinct reasserting itself after the primal urgency of hunger had been satisfied. It was trying to put itself back together. The gesture was so vulnerable, so trusting, that it stole the air from Leo's lungs. He sat there, in that awful plastic chair, watching a sick street cat wash its face in a hospital waiting room. And he felt a peace settle over him that he hadn't felt since before the phone call. The world was still broken. His father was still critically ill upstairs. This cat was still desperately sick. But right here, right now, there was this. This small, quiet moment of care. This tiny thread that connected his heart to another living, struggling thing. Have you ever had an animal wait for you, even when you didn't ask them to? This one hadn't waited for him. It had found him. And in finding him, it had given him a job. A purpose outside of his own swirling panic. It had given him something to guard, something to care for. And in doing so, it had quietly, without any fanfare, begun to guard and care for a broken piece of him too. The cat finished its clumsy washing, its energy clearly spent. It didn't retreat back under the chair. It simply lay down, right there on the open floor, its body curled, its head facing him. Its eyes were heavy-lidded now. The slow, deliberate blink came again, and then its eyes closed. Its breathing, while still too fast, seemed to even out just a little. It was sleeping. It felt safe enough to sleep in his presence. Leo watched over it, the sentinel and his charge, and for the first time in 24 hours, he felt the faint, fragile warmth of hope. The world shrank to the size of a hospital waiting room. For the next 36 hours, that was the entirety of Leo's universe. The plastic chairs were its continents, the scuffed linoleum its oceans, the vending machine down the hall its sole source of sustenance. He became a creature of routine, of quiet, obsessive habit. He'd sleep in fitful 2-hour bursts in the chair, his neck aching, jolting awake at every distant page or footstep, his first instinct always to look to the space under the opposite chair, to make sure she was still there. He'd started thinking of the cat as she. It felt right. There was a weary, maternal resilience to her, a sense of having endured things he couldn't possibly imagine. He'd named her too, though only in the silent, secret theater of his own mind. He called her Cricket, because of the sound, that faint, raspy chirp she made sometimes, not a meow, but a tiny, broken vibration in her throat when she saw him return with food. It was the sound of a voice worn down to its last fragile thread. His days became a cycle of vigilances. The primary vigil was for his father. He'd get brief, guarded updates from the ICU nurses. He's holding his own. His vitals are stable. The doctor will be by later. Each word was a stone he collected, building a fragile path over the chasm of his fear. He was allowed to see him once, for 5 minutes, draped in gowns and masks. His father looked small and impossibly old amidst the tangle of wires and the rhythmic hiss of the ventilator, a machine breathing for him. Leo held his limp, cool hand and whispered, "I'm here, Dad. I'm right here." He didn't know if the words penetrated the deep sedation, but he needed to say them. The second vigil was for Cricket. It was a more active, all-consuming duty. He became an expert in her. He learned the specific rhythm of her breathing when she was in a deep sleep versus the quicker, shallower pants of her fever dreams. He learned that she preferred the tuna from the sandwich, but would reluctantly eat the chunks of chicken he picked out of a prepackaged salad if he held them between his fingers for a long moment, letting his scent mingle with theirs. He learned she would only drink water if it was in a fresh, clean lid, refusing the old one if it had collected any dust or fuzz from the floor. He'd found a janitor's closet left ajar and had, his heart hammering with the thrill of his petty crime, liberated a stack of small, brown, disposable paper towels. They were his greatest treasure. He used them to create a softer bed for her under the chair, changing them when they got damp or dirty. He used them to gently dab at the raw patch on her leg, an act she tolerated with a tense stillness, her eyes wide and unblinking, but she never scratched or hissed. It was a negotiation of trust, conducted entirely in silence. He'd also bought, A small, shallow plastic container of pudding from the vending machine, eaten the contents in 2 quick spoonfuls, and washed it thoroughly in the bathroom sink. This became her official water dish, a monumental upgrade from the milk carton lid. She'd seemed to understand its permanence, circling it once before drinking, as if approving of the new real estate. Their world was precarious, a soap bubble of peace floating in a hospital full of chaos. They had close calls, a security guard making his rounds, his flashlight beam skating across the floor, missing her hiding spot by inches. A group of teenagers, loud and restless, who spilled a bag of chips, sending greasy crumbs scattering everywhere, forcing Cricket to retreat deep into her shadows, trembling. Each time, Leo's body would flood with a cold adrenaline, ready to lie, to distract, to become a wall between her and any perceived threat. He was her protector, her guardian. And in a way, he was only beginning to understand. She was his. His friend Mark texted, "Dude, I'm coming. You can't live in that waiting room. I'm bringing you a real meal." Panic, sharp and immediate, seized Leo. He typed back, his fingers flying. "No, seriously, not yet. It's a weird vibe here. I need the quiet. I'll come out soon, I promise." He couldn't let Mark come. Mark would see. Mark would want to help. Mark would say, "Leo, it's a feral cat. It's probably riddled with disease. We need to call someone." And he would be right, but he would also be wrong. This wasn't about logic. This was about the quiet agreement between 2 broken things. This was about the way she would slowly blink at him now when he arrived with food, a gesture he always returned. This was about the way his own breathing would unconsciously sync with hers during the long, quiet stretches of the night. This was about the fact that caring for her was the only thing keeping him from dissolving into a puddle of pure, terrified static. And then, the pattern began. It started on the second night. He'd fallen into a deeper sleep than usual, the exhaustion finally overwhelming the plastic chair's discomfort. He woke with a jolt to the sound of the automatic doors at the end of the hall swishing open and closed. It was late. The hallway was empty. He looked instantly to Cricket's chair. She was gone. The space under the chair was empty. The little paper towel bed was there, indented with the shape of her small body, but she was gone. A cold dread, entirely different from the fear for his father, washed over him. It was a feeling of abandonment, sharp and childish. She'd left. She was better. Or she'd gotten scared, and she'd just left. He felt a fool. Of course she had. She was a wild thing. This was a temporary stop for her. A roadside diner where the food was free. She wasn't his. She had never been his. He stood up, his body stiff, and walked to the main corridor, looking left and right. Nothing. The hallway was long and bright and empty. She had vanished back into the night from which she came. He felt a loss so acute it was a physical pain in his side. He'd known her for 2 days, and her absence felt like a cavity, a hollowed-out space in the room, in his routine, in himself. Dejected, he walked back to his chair and sat down heavily, staring at the empty space. He must have sat there for 20 minutes, feeling sorry for himself, grappling with this new, strange layer of loneliness. And then he heard it. The faintest swish of the automatic doors. He didn't even look up. It was just the night wind, or a nurse, or his imagination. But then came the sound. The soft, hesitant tip-tap of claws on linoleum. He lifted his head. Cricket was walking down the hallway toward the waiting room. She moved slowly, her gait even more stiff and careful than usual. She was covered in a fine sheen of mist from the damp night air. And she was carrying something in her mouth. Leo froze, not daring to move a muscle, not even to breathe. This was different. This was new. She walked into the waiting room, her eyes fixed on him, and dropped the object onto the floor about 5 feet from his chair. It was a small, brown feather, slightly battered, the kind that might have come from a sparrow or a starling. It lay there on the sterile floor, a tiny piece of the outside world. She looked from the feather to him, gave that soft, raspy chirp, and then, without another moment's hesitation, she turned and walked stiffly back under her chair, curling up on her paper towels with a heavy sigh, as if a great task had been completed. Leo stared at the feather. It was just a feather, a random, dirty thing, but it felt like a message, a receipt, a token. Had she brought it for him? Was it a gift? A payment for the tuna and the water? He didn't know. He didn't understand the language, but the gesture was unmistakable. She had left, but she had come back, and she had brought something with her. The next night, it happened again. He was awake for it this time, pretending to be asleep, watching through slitted eyes. As the clock neared 2 a.m., Cricket stirred. She stretched, her body a tense arc of discomfort, and quietly slipped out from under the chair. She didn't look at him. She just moved with a quiet purpose down the hallway, and sat, patiently, before the automatic doors. They hissed open, sensing her presence, and she stepped out into the dark. Leo's mind raced. Where was she going? Was she going to the bathroom? Was there a colony of cats out there? Was she hunting? She was far too weak and sick to hunt. The 20 minutes she was gone were an agony of imagined terrors. Cars, raccoons, cruel people, the sheer vastness of the night. He was poised to run after her, to drag her back to safety, consequences be damned. But right on time, the doors swished open and she reappeared. This time, in her mouth, was a long, twisted piece of brown packaging twine, frayed at the ends. She walked to the same spot on the floor, dropped it next to the feather, which he had carefully placed on the windowsill, and returned to her bed. The following night, it was a bottle cap, blue and scratched. The night after that, a single yellowing maple leaf, perfectly preserved. It became their ritual, their secret. Every night, between 1:30 and 2 a.m., Cricket would rise, answer some silent call, and disappear into the darkness for exactly 15 to 20 minutes. And every night, she would return, bearing some small, worthless, beautiful treasure. She never ate during these excursions. She never seemed to get any stronger or weaker from them. It was simply something she had to do. Leo stopped seeing them as random bits of trash. He began to see them as chapters in a story he couldn't read. The feather, the string, the bottle cap, the leaf. They were clues. They were offerings. Each one was a piece of a map that led back to her life before him, before this hospital. A life of alleys and dumpsters and hidden nests. She was bringing pieces of her world into his. She was trying to show him something. Do you think animals know? When we're at our lowest, he knew the answer now. It wasn't about knowing the specifics. It was about sensing the emptiness. She had walked into that waiting room and seen a man who was hollowed out by fear, a man with nothing to give. And her response, her ancient, feral wisdom was to begin filling him up. Not with grand gestures, but with small, broken things. She was teaching him how to care again. And in return, she was giving him the only things she owned: a feather, a string, a bottle cap. Her entire worldly wealth laid at his feet. He started to worry in a new way. This nightly journey was a vulnerability. What if the doors didn't open for her one night? What if she got disoriented and couldn't find her way back? What if someone saw her coming or going and decided to intervene? The fear of losing her became a constant, low-grade hum in the back of his mind, a second soundtrack to the fear for his father. He found himself waiting for 2 a.m. with a strange mix of dread and anticipation. The gift itself was less important than the ritual, the proof that she would choose to come back. On the 5th night, the pattern broke. It was well past 2:30 a.m. Leo was fully awake, perched on the edge of his seat, his eyes fixed on the hallway. The automatic doors had remained still. Cricket had not returned. The empty space under the chair seemed to yawn wider, a dark mouth mocking his anxiety. 10 minutes late. Then 20. A cold, sick feeling began to pool in his stomach. Something was wrong. He knew it. He felt it in the frantic beating of his own heart. He stood up, pacing the small room, running a hand through his greasy hair. He should go look. But where? The hospital was surrounded by a massive parking lot, then busy streets, then a neighborhood he didn't know. The world was too big. She was too small. He was about to throw caution to the wind and march out through those doors himself when he finally heard the familiar swish. He spun around, a wave of relief so strong it made him dizzy, crashing over him, but it wasn't the same. Cricket didn't walk back in. She stumbled, Her gait was a lurching, uncoordinated shuffle. She was not carrying a gift. Her head was low, and she was dragging her back right leg slightly. She didn't even look at him. She didn't make her way to the spot on the floor to make her offering. She moved in a straight, desperate line toward her chair, her breathing, a loud, ragged gasp that echoed in the silent hall. She didn't make it. Halfway across the waiting room floor, her legs simply gave out. She collapsed onto her side, her body heaving with the effort to breathe. She let out a single, pitiful sound. Not a chirp, not a meow, but a weak, watery cry of pure distress. And then, she was still. The world stopped. The hum of the vending machine, the distant, mechanical breath of the hospital, the faint whisper of the air conditioning, it all vanished into a deafening, high-pitched silence. There was only the small, still form on the floor, and the sound of Leo's own heart, trying to batter its way out of his chest. For 1 second, maybe 2, he was paralyzed. His brain refused to process the image. It was wrong. It was a mistake. She was just resting. She was tired from her walk. But the angle of her body was all wrong, a collapsed puppet with its strings cut. And the silence from her was a void, a terrible, sucking emptiness where her ragged breath should have been. Then the spell shattered. No. The word was a gasp, torn from somewhere deep inside him. It wasn't a denial. It was a plea. A prayer. He was on his knees beside her before he was even aware he had moved, the cold of the linoleum searing through the fabric of his jeans. His hands hovered over her, trembling violently. He was afraid to touch her. She looked so fragile, a mosaic of bone and matted fur that might disintegrate under the slightest pressure. Her side was still, utterly, completely still. "Cricket?" he whispered, his voice cracking. Hey, come on." He reached out a single, shaking finger and touched the fur between her shoulder blades. It was cold, damp from the night air, and there was no rise, no fall. A sound escaped him, a half-sob, half-groan of pure anguish. This couldn't be happening, not here, not now, not after everything. His mind, fogged with days of exhaustion and fear, suddenly snapped into a terrifying, crystal-clear focus. This was a hospital. There were doctors here, people who fixed things. He could yell, he could run into the hall and scream for help. But a colder, more rational thought followed on its heels. Who would he yell for? A surgeon for a cat? They'd usher him aside. They'd call security. They'd take her away. They'd put her in a plastic bag, and that would be it. The end of her story. The end of their quiet, secret pact. No. That was not going to happen. He would not allow it. Acting on an instinct he didn't know he possessed, he gently, so gently, slid his hands under her small body. She was a featherweight, a collection of sticks wrapped in a rough towel. He lifted her, cradling her against his chest, and her head lolled back, her mouth slightly open, her pale green eyes glazed and unseeing. The sight was a physical blow. He stumbled to his feet, clutching her to him, his own breath coming in. Ragged, panicked gasps that echoed in the empty room. He had to get her out of here. He had to find help. But where? It was the middle of the night. The world outside was asleep. The car. The thought was a lifeline. His car was in the parking lot. He could drive. He could find a 24-hour animal hospital. There had to be one somewhere. He had no idea where, but he would drive until he found it. He would drive forever. Holding her close with one arm, he grabbed his backpack with the other, dumping its contents onto the chair, his phone, his charger, his wallet. The stupid, normal things of a normal life. He left it all there. He didn't need any of it. He only needed her to be okay. He moved quickly, walking with a stiff, frantic pace down the bright, empty hallway, clutching Cricket to his chest. He was a man possessed, a ghost in a haunted hospital. He passed the nurse's station, half expecting to be stopped, but it was momentarily empty. The automatic doors at the main entrance hissed open, and the cold night air hit him like a slap. It was raining, a fine, icy mist that glittered under the orange glow of the parking lot lights. He had no coat. He didn't feel it. He ran. his shoes slapping against the wet asphalt, his arms tightening around Cricket, trying to shield her from the weather. His car was an island in a sea of empty spaces. He fumbled for his keys with wet, numb fingers, dropping them once. With a clatter that sounded like a gunshot in the silent night, he scooped them up, unlocked the passenger door, and slid inside. The interior of the car was cold and dark. He placed Cricket gently on the passenger seat, her body limp and unresponsive. "Hold on," he begged her, his voice a raw whisper. "Just hold on, okay? I've got you." He fumbled with his phone, his hands shaking so badly he could barely type. 24-hour emergency vet. The search results loaded with agonizing slowness. 1. There was one 12 miles away. He punched the address into his Maps app, tossed the phone onto the dashboard, and started the car. The engine roared to life, a jarringly loud, alive sound. The drive was a blur of rain-smeared streetlights, and a terror so profound it felt like he was drowning. He drove too fast, his eyes constantly flicking from the road to the small, still form on the seat beside him. He talked to her the whole way, a continuous, desperate stream of nonsense. "You're gonna be okay. You're a fighter. I see it in you. Remember the tuna? That was good, right? We'll get more. All you want. Please, Cricket. Please, don't go. Don't you dare go." He was crying now, hot, silent tears streaming down his face, mingling with the rain on his cheeks. He didn't bother to wipe them away. The fear for his father, a constant dull ache in his heart, had been joined by this new, sharp, and immediate agony. It was too much. It was all too much. He skidded into the parking lot of the animal hospital, a low, modern building with a brightly lit sign. He didn't even turn off the car. He just grabbed Cricket, leaped out, and ran for the door, leaving the driver's side door wide open, the engine running. The inside was a surreal parallel of his human hospital experience. Bright lights, a reception desk, a waiting area with a few other people, their faces drawn with worry, holding carriers with quiet, anxious pets inside. The air smelled of antiseptic, too, but underneath it was the smell of animal, of damp fur and anxiety. A woman behind the desk looked up, her eyes widening slightly at the sight of him. A wild-eyed, soaking wet man holding a clearly lifeless, stray cat in his arms. "I need help," he choked out, his voice breaking. "Please. She's not breathing." He didn't have to explain. The woman was already moving, hitting a button, calling out, "Tech to the front, stat!" A moment later, a door swung open, and a young man in blue scrubs emerged. His eyes took in the situation in a single professional glance. "Come with me," he said, his voice calm and efficient. Leo followed him through the door into a back area of stainless steel tables and medical equipment. The tech took Cricket from his arms and laid her on a table. He pulled a stethoscope from his neck and listened to her chest. His face was grim. "I'm not getting a heartbeat. We're going to start CPR. Wait in the lobby, sir. The doctor will be right with you." "No, Leo started, but another tech was already gently but firmly guiding him back through the swinging doors, back to the waiting room. He stood there dripping onto the tile, his arms feeling horrifically empty and cold. He could see them through the small window in the door, working on her, moving with a frantic, purposeful energy. One was doing chest compressions with 2 fingers. Another was placing a mask over her face, squeezing a small bag to pump air into her lungs. Leo couldn't watch. He turned away, his legs buckling, and sank into a chair. He put his head in his hands and wept. He wept for Cricket. He wept for his father, lying in a hospital bed miles away. He wept for the sheer, unbearable cruelty of a universe that would let something so small and brave suffer so much. He wept for the feather, and the string, and the bottle cap left behind. On the hospital floor, useless, beautiful gifts. Time lost all meaning. It could have been 5 minutes or an hour. He just sat there, hollowed out, listening to the frantic, muffled sounds of them trying to save her life. Finally, the door opened. The doctor was a woman with a kind, tired face. She walked over to him. Leo looked up, his heart in his throat, trying to read her expression. It was unreadable. "Mr. Evans?" she asked softly. He'd given his name at the front desk. He nodded, unable to speak. "We got a heartbeat back," she said. The relief was so violent it was nauseating. He slumped forward, a sob of pure, unadulterated gratitude wrenching itself from his core. Oh, thank God. Thank you. But, the doctor said, and the word was a cold dash of water. She's not out of the woods. Not by a long shot. She's critically unstable. She's severely dehydrated, malnourished, and she's running a very high fever. We need to get an IV line in her. Get her on fluids and antibiotics immediately. We also need to find out what caused this collapse. Do it, Leo said immediately, his voice fierce. Whatever it takes, do it. There's also the matter of payment, the doctor said gently, apologetically. This is going to be very expensive. ICU care, overnight monitoring, medications. Leo didn't hesitate. He pulled out his wallet and handed over his credit card. It was for his rent, for his groceries. He didn't care. He would max it. Out. He would sell the car. It was just money. It was paper. She was a life. Use it, he said. The doctor took the card, her eyes softening. Okay, we'll get started. You can wait here. It's going to be a while. More waiting. The cruelest torture. He called the human hospital, his voice shaking, to check on his father. No change, the nurse said. He's stable. Stable. It was the best word in the English language. An hour later, the doctor came out again. She had an odd expression on her face. Not worry, not anymore. Something else. Something like puzzled revelation. Mr. Evans? We got her stabilized. The IV is in. Her temperature is coming down. But we found something. Well, the reason for her roundness. We thought it was just bloating from malnutrition. Leo's breath caught. What is it? We did an ultrasound to check her organs, the doctor said, a faint, incredulous smile touching her lips. She's not just sick, Mr. Evans. She's pregnant. The word hung in the air between them, vast and impossible. Pregnant. It didn't compute. It was too big. Too monumental. His mind, sluggish with exhaustion, tried to process it. The thinness. The swollen belly he'd attributed to starvation. Her nightly journeys. She wasn't bringing back gifts. She wasn't answering some strange, collecting instinct. She was nesting. She was a mother. Desperately trying to prepare for her kittens, gathering soft things, little treasures, to make a safe place for them to be born. She had chosen the hospital waiting room. She had chosen him. She had been trying to build her nest near him because some deep, primal part of her knew she was failing, knew she couldn't do it alone. Her collapse wasn't just a sickness. It was her body, pushed to the absolute brink, giving out under the strain of trying to create life while her own was fading. The pieces crashed together in his mind, forming a picture so heartbreakingly clear it stole the air from his lungs. The feather, for a soft bed. The string, to tie it all together. The bottle cap. A toy? A shiny distraction? The leaf. A piece of the outside world to remind them of home. She wasn't just a sick cat. She was a mother, fighting for the lives of her unborn babies. Tears filled his eyes. Again, but they were different tears. They were tears of awe, of humbled, staggering respect. The babies, he managed to whisper. Are they? Their heartbeats are strong, the doctor said, and her own voice was thick with emotion. It's a miracle. With her level of toxicity and fever, it's a real miracle they've held on. She's protecting them. She's a very strong girl. Can I see her? Leo asked, his voice barely audible. The doctor led him back into the treatment area. Cricket was in an incubator, a tiny bundle of fur surrounded by wires and tubes. An IV was taped to her front leg. She looked small and swamped by technology. But she was breathing on her own now, the rhythm deep and even. Her side rose and fell. Rose and fell. He approached slowly, his tears falling freely now. He wasn't crying out of sadness. He was crying from the sheer, overwhelming force of the love this creature embodied. A love so fierce she had walked into a hospital on the verge of death to find a safe harbor for her children. He reached a hand into the incubator and gently, so gently, placed his fingertips on her head, between her tattered ears. Her fur was warm now, alive. Her eyes fluttered open. those pale, watery green eyes. They were clouded with drugs and exhaustion, but they found his. She looked at him. She knew him, and then, with an effort that seemed to take every last ounce of her strength, she did it. She leaned her head, ever so slightly, into the pressure of his fingers. It was more than a slow blink. It was an unmistakable gesture of trust, of surrender, of thanks. It was the press of her head into his palm. It was her saying, "I'm here, they're here, we're all here, and we need you." Leo stood there, his hand resting on the head of a brave, tiny mother, and finally, he understood. She hadn't just been bringing him gifts. She had been bringing him her purpose. She had been showing him her heart. And in her darkest moment, she had chosen him to hold it. He finally saw what she had been trying to tell him all along. The storm passed, not with a dramatic crash, but with a slow, gentle receding, like tidewaters pulling back from a battered shore. Leo left the animal hospital as the first hint of dawn was bleeding into the sky, the rain having softened to a mist that clung to everything. The world felt new, washed clean. He drove back to the human hospital in a daze. The empty passenger seat a stark reminder of the fragile life now tethered to machines miles away. But the emptiness didn't feel hollow anymore. It felt expectant. He walked back into the waiting room. It was the same plastic chairs, the same scuffed floor, the same hum from the vending machine, but it was also completely different. It was a sacred place now, a birthplace of miracles. He looked at the spot where Cricket had collapsed. He looked at the windowsill where her treasures still sat, the feather, the string, the bottle cap, the leaf. He gathered them up carefully, as if they were holy relics, and put them in his pocket. Her dowry, her hope. He sat back down in his chair, the same chair he'd occupied for days, and he waited. But the waiting was different now. The frantic, clawing anxiety was gone. It had been replaced by a steady, low thrum of purpose. He was waiting for something now, not just waiting out of fear. The update on his father, when it came later that morning, was good. Better than good. "He's waking up," the nurse said, her smile genuine this time. "He's responsive. He's weak, but he's asking for you." The words didn't feel like stones anymore. They felt like feathers. They felt like leaves. He was allowed to see him. His father was propped up on pillows, his face still pale. The tubes and wires still there, but fewer now. His eyes were open. They were foggy with medication. But they were his eyes. They focused on Leo. "Leo," he whispered, his voice a dry rustle. "Hey, Dad," Leo said, taking his hand. It was warm. Alive. He held it, and for the first time in days, he didn't feel like he was holding on for dear life. He was just holding his father's hand. "You stayed," his father breathed, his eyes closing again. "Yeah, Dad," Leo said, his voice thick. "I stayed." He did leave, later that afternoon. He went home. He showered for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, the hot water scalding away the layers of hospital air and fear. He changed his clothes. He slept in his own bed for a few hours, a deep, dreamless sleep that felt like sinking into a soft, dark cloud. And then he went back. Not just to the human hospital, but to the animal hospital first. He visited Cricket every day, sometimes twice a day. The vet bills mounted, on his credit card, a number that would have once given him heart palpitations. Now, he just paid them. It was the easiest decision he'd ever made. She was in an oxygen cage for 2 days, her breathing too labored. Then she was moved to a regular kennel. The IV remained, pumping her full of fluids and antibiotics, fighting the infection that had nearly claimed her and her kittens. The change in her was slow, then all at once. The dull, matted fur began to soften and show a hint of sheen. The raw patch on her leg healed over into new pink skin. The terrifying gauntness of her face filled out just enough to lose its skeletal sharpness. But the biggest change was in her eyes. The ancient weary pain didn't vanish, but it was joined by something else. A light, a awareness, a flicker of peace. She always knew when he arrived. Her ears would twitch first, then her head would turn, and she would offer her slow, deliberate blink. He always blinked back. Their language. He'd sit on the floor next to her kennel for an hour at a time, talking to her in a low voice, telling her about his dad's progress, about the weather, about nothing at all. He told her about the feather and the string, and how he had them safe. She would sometimes press her face against the bars of the kennel, and he would stroke her cheek, with one finger, a ritual of connection. The vet was cautiously optimistic. "She's a miracle," she'd say, shaking her head in wonder. "The kittens are strong. Their heartbeats are perfect. She's eating. She's fighting. She wants to live." A week after the night she collapsed, his father was moved out of the ICU and into a regular room. He was sitting up, eating Jell-O, complaining about the food. It was the most beautiful sound Leo had ever heard. The world was righting itself. The immense, terrifying weight was lifting, leaving his shoulders feeling strangely light, almost buoyant. He was in his father's room, telling him a sanitized version of the cricket story, leaving out the near-death collapse, focusing on the friendly hospital cat, when his phone buzzed. It was the animal hospital. His heart leaped into his throat. Calls between visits were never good. He excused himself and stepped into the hallway, his hand trembling as he answered. "Mr. Evans?" It was the vet. Her voice was bright, excited. "You might want to come down here. Our girl has decided she's done waiting. It's time." He drove faster than he should have. When he burst through the doors of the animal hospital, the receptionist just smiled and pointed down the hall. "They're in room 3. He pushed the door open softly. Cricket was in a large, low-sided box lined with soft blankets. A tech was kneeling beside her, but she looked up and smiled, motioning for Leo to come in. "She just started about 20 minutes ago. She's doing great. She's being so brave." Leo sank to his knees beside the box. Cricket was panting, her eyes half closed with concentration. She looked up at him when he arrived, and she let out a soft, chirping meow. He reached in and placed his hand on her side, feeling the powerful contractions ripple under his palm. He stayed there, whispering to her, telling her she was strong, she was amazing, she was the best mother in the world. And then it happened. A tiny, wet, squirming creature emerged into the world. Cricket immediately turned and began to clean it with a fierce, tender devotion, her rough tongue washing away the birth sac. The kitten, no bigger than a thumb, let out a tiny, squeaking mewl. It was black and white, a tiny panda bear. A moment later, a second one appeared. This one was gray, like its mother. Then a third, a little orange marmalade. 3 perfect, tiny lives. They nuzzled their way toward her, finding their source of warmth and food, and the world in that small room shrank to the size of a cardboard box. It was the most primal, most beautiful thing Leo had ever witnessed. He was crying again, but they were tears of pure, unadulterated joy. He was witnessing a miracle. No, 3 miracles. Cricket settled down, curling her body around her newborns, her purr a loud, rattling rumble of pure contentment. It was the first time he'd ever heard her purr. It was the sound of victory, the sound of a journey completed. She looked up at him, her eyes heavy with exhaustion and love, and she blinked her slow, trusting blink. The tech slipped out, leaving them alone. Leo sat on the floor, his back against the wall, and just watched them. The mother and her 3 babies. He must have sat there for an hour, just watching them breathe, listening to the tiny squeaks and the deep rumbling purr. He felt a peace so profound, it was like a physical warmth spreading through his chest. This was the gift. This was the resolution, not an ending, but a glorious, messy, beautiful beginning. A final gift appeared a few days later. His father was being discharged. Leo was packing his things into a bag when his dad, moving slower but under his own power, walked over to the windowsill in his room. He picked up a small potted plant the hospital volunteers had given him, a cheerful, flowering begonia. "Here," his father said, handing it to Leo. "For that cat of yours, for her, nest or whatever, something alive, better than an old leaf." Leo took the plant, his throat tight. It was a simple gesture, but it felt monumental. His gruff, practical father, acknowledging this strange, beautiful thread that had pulled Leo through the darkness. It was an acceptance, a blessing. He drove to the animal hospital. Cricket and the kittens were home in his apartment now, set up in a quiet corner of his bedroom with the box and soft blankets and all her treasures. The feather, the string, the bottle cap, the leaf, placed around them like talismans. He put the begonia plant beside the box, its bright flowers a promise of life and continued growth. That night, he sat on the floor beside them, watching the kittens sleep in a wriggling pile, their bellies full. Cricket was watching him. She stood up, stretched, and then, with a grace she hadn't possessed before, she jumped out of the box. She didn't go to her food bowl or her water dish. She walked over to him. She looked up into his face for a long moment, her green eyes clear and deep, and then she leaped into his lap. She turned around twice, kneading his leg with her paws, and then she settled down, curling into a perfect circle, her purr vibrating through his entire body. She placed her head on his knee, sighed a deep sigh of utter contentment, and closed her eyes. She was trusting him with her most precious things. She was home. Leo sat there in the quiet, dim light of his apartment, a purring cat in his lap, 3 sleeping kittens nearby, and he felt the last of the weight lift away. The fear was gone. The loneliness was gone. It had been replaced by a quiet, steady hum of love. He had gone to the hospital a son, afraid of becoming an orphan. He had come home a father. He had learned that love isn't always a grand gesture. Sometimes it's a slow blink in a dark room. It's a ragged breath held in sync. It's a feather, a string, a bottle cap, a leaf. It's showing someone your broken pieces and trusting them to hold them. It's the courage to walk into a strange place when you are at your most vulnerable and simply wait for the right heart to find you. And sometimes, if you are very lucky, that heart finds you right back. You stayed till the end. Thank you. If it felt like a soft hug or a warm purr in your heart, subscribing lets me bring you more moments like this.